Rebecca Torres helped a stranded motorist change his flat tire on the isolated county road beside her struggling North Dakota farm. She had no idea that beneath her grandmother's old root cellar lay a cache of classified Cold War documents, so sensitive that the FBI would seal off her entire property within 48 hours, transforming her from a single mother facing bankruptcy into the unlikely guardian of secrets that could rewrite American intelligence history. Before we dive deeper into Rebecca's extraordinary discovery, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if stories like this inspire you, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow I've got something even more shocking about a librarian who found manuscripts that could change everything we know about the Founding Fathers. At 34 years old, Rebecca Torres was fighting a losing battle against forces that seemed determined to strip away everything her family had built over 3 generations. Standing in the pre-dawn darkness of another brutal February morning, watching her breath form clouds in the -15-degree air as she trudged toward the barn that housed her dwindling livestock, Rebecca felt the crushing weight of responsibility that came with being the sole provider for her 2 young children while trying to maintain a 280-acre farm that was hemorrhaging money faster than she could earn it. The Torres family farm in Pembina County, North Dakota, had been a source of pride and stability since 1952, when Rebecca's grandfather, Miguel Torres, had purchased the property with savings accumulated from working the wheat harvests throughout the Midwest during the post-war agricultural boom. Miguel had been a Mexican immigrant who believed that hard work and fertile land could provide security for generations of Torres family members yet to be born. He'd built the original farmhouse with help from neighbors, dug the first well using equipment borrowed from other farmers, and planted the crops that established the Torres farm as a reliable producer of wheat, corn, and soybeans that fed into the regional agricultural economy. Miguel's daughter, Carmen Torres, had inherited the farm in 1978 and had modernized the operation through the prosperous 1980s and 1990s, adding updated equipment, improved storage facilities, and diversified crops that had sustained the family through various economic uncertainties and weather challenges that periodically affected North Dakota agriculture. Carmen had been the one to build the current farmhouse in 1985, a sturdy 2-story home with 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a large kitchen where 2 generations of Torres women had prepared meals for harvest crews, family celebrations, and community gatherings that brought together farming families from throughout Pembina County. Rebecca had grown up expecting to inherit a thriving agricultural operation that would provide financial security for her own children. But a series of devastating circumstances over the past 4 years had transformed the family farm from an asset into a liability that threatened to destroy everything she was trying to build for her daughter Sophia, age 8, and her son Miguel, age 5, named after his great-grandfather who had established the family's American dream on North Dakota soil. The crisis had begun with Rebecca's divorce from her husband Carlos in 2019, a painful separation that had divided the family's assets and left Rebecca with primary custody of the children and responsibility for maintaining the farm without the second income that had previously helped cover the substantial costs of agricultural operations. Carlos had moved to Minneapolis to work in construction, sending sporadic child support payments that rarely arrived when needed and never covered the full amount specified in their divorce agreement. The financial strain had intensified dramatically. When a severe hailstorm in July 2021 had destroyed 80% of Rebecca's corn crop just 3 weeks before harvest, resulting in insurance claims that covered only a fraction of her anticipated income while leaving her with the full burden of equipment, payments, property taxes, and operational expenses that had been calculated based on expected crop revenues that never materialized. The devastating weather had been followed by supply chain disruptions and inflation that had increased the cost of fertilizer, seed, fuel, and equipment maintenance by 40–60%, while commodity prices remained relatively stable, creating a cost-price squeeze that made profitable farming nearly impossible for small operations like Rebecca's that lacked the economies of scale necessary to absorb dramatic increases in input costs. Rebecca's personal financial situation had become increasingly desperate as she struggled to maintain both the farm operations and basic household expenses for her family. Her savings account, which had contained $23,000 when her divorce was finalized, was now overdrawn by $1,847. Her credit cards were maxed out at a combined total of $31,400, representing emergency purchases of heating oil, groceries, children's clothing, and farm supplies that she couldn't afford with her dramatically reduced income. The bank had already sent 3 foreclosure notices, giving her until March 15th, exactly 31 days away, to catch up on $22,680 in missed mortgage payments or lose the farm that had been in her family for over 70 years. The foreclosure documents sat on her kitchen table like ticking time bombs, official papers printed on bank letterhead that reduced 3 generations of family history and agricultural achievement to a series of missed payment dates and legal procedures that would transfer ownership of everything her grandfather had worked to build. Rebecca had taken a part-time job at the Casey's General Store in nearby Cavalier, working 25 hours per week for $13.50 per hour, while also trying to manage the farm operations and care for Sophia and Miguel as a single parent. The retail work required her to drive 18 miles each way, using gasoline she could barely afford, to earn approximately $877 per month before taxes, money that helped cover groceries and utilities, but couldn't possibly address the larger financial crisis that was consuming her family's agricultural legacy. The children had adapted to their new circumstances with the resilience that kids often display during family crises, but Rebecca could see the stress and uncertainty affecting their behavior and their social development. Sophia had been forced to quit the youth basketball league because Rebecca couldn't afford the $120 registration fee and transportation costs for games in other towns. Miguel had given up his dreams of joining the preschool soccer program when they learned that participation required equipment and fees that totaled $89, money that needed to be spent on heating oil and groceries instead of children's activities. Both children had started asking careful questions about money, displaying the kind of premature awareness of adult financial stress that no 8-year-old and 5-year-old should have to carry. Sophia had begun helping with household chores and farm tasks that were normally adult responsibilities, understanding somehow that her mother needed all the help she could get to manage their increasingly difficult circumstances. Miguel had stopped requesting toys or treats during their infrequent trips to town, instinctively recognizing that his family was struggling with expenses far more serious than children's entertainment. The physical infrastructure of the farm was deteriorating due to Rebecca's inability to afford necessary maintenance and repairs. The main barn needed a new roof that would cost approximately $12,000. But every rainfall resulted in water damage to stored hay and equipment that she couldn't afford to replace. The tractor, a 1998 John Deere that had been the farm's primary piece of equipment for over 2 decades, was developing mechanical problems that required expensive repairs she couldn't afford, forcing Rebecca to postpone maintenance that would eventually result in complete equipment failure. The farmhouse itself was showing signs of deferred maintenance that would have been unthinkable during the farm's prosperous years. The furnace was failing intermittently during North Dakota's brutal winter months, requiring Rebecca to use space heaters and extra blankets to keep the children warm, while she saved money for heating system repairs that would cost more than 3 months of her Casey's wages. The well pump had started making concerning noises that suggested impending failure, a crisis that could leave the family without running water and would require emergency repairs costing thousands of dollars that Rebecca simply didn't have available. Even basic household maintenance like painting, roof repairs, and window replacements had been postponed indefinitely, giving the property the worn, neglected appearance of a family that was losing its battle against circumstances beyond their control. Rebecca had spent countless hours over the past 2 years applying for every agricultural assistance program, emergency loan option, and family support service available to North Dakota farmers and single parents. The application processes had become a part-time job in themselves, requiring detailed financial records, crop production histories, documentation of family circumstances, and paperwork that took weeks to complete and submit for each program. Most applications had been denied due to previous loan obligations that made Rebecca ineligible for additional credit, income requirements that disqualified struggling farmers who needed help the most, or bureaucratic restrictions that seemed designed to prevent assistance from reaching the people who were actually facing genuine emergencies. The few programs that had provided assistance had offered amounts so small that they barely covered a single month's worth of basic expenses, while doing nothing to address the underlying financial crisis that was threatening the farm's survival. Rebecca had also explored every possible alternative income source available to rural North Dakota single mothers facing similar circumstances. She'd investigated establishing a daycare center in her home, but that would require licensing, insurance, and facility improvements that were impossible to afford. She'd considered renting portions of her land to hunting outfitters, but the lease payments offered were minimal and would interfere with her own agricultural operations. She'd looked into direct marketing of farm products through farmers' markets and online sales, but successful direct marketing required consistent crop production and marketing resources that were beyond her current financial capacity. The emotional and psychological toll of watching 3 generations of family legacy disintegrate was even worse than the financial devastation. Rebecca had grown up believing that hard work, responsible land stewardship, and dedication to family values would ensure success and security for her children. Her grandfather and mother had taught her that farming was not just a profession, but a way of life that connected families to the land and contributed to the essential work of feeding America and supporting rural communities. The combination of divorce, weather disasters, and economic pressures had shattered those beliefs, replacing them with a crushing sense of personal failure and helplessness that kept Rebecca awake most nights, staring at the ceiling and running calculations that, never resulted in viable solutions. She'd begun to question everything she'd been taught about farming, family values, and the relationship between effort and success. How could 3 generations of successful farmers have been so wrong about agriculture as a foundation for family security? Rebecca tried to maintain optimism for the sake of Sophia and Miguel, talking about riding out the current difficulties and things improving next season. But she could see the forced cheerfulness in her own behavior when discussing their situation. With the children, or with neighbors who asked how the family was managing their challenges, she was working longer hours at Casey's whenever extra shifts became available. But her retail income of approximately $100 per month after taxes couldn't possibly cover the expenses of maintaining a 280-acre farm that required constant financial inputs even when it generated minimal revenue. The children had gradually stopped mentioning friends' social media posts about family vacations, new clothes, restaurant meals, and entertainment activities that were now impossible for the Torres family to afford. Sophia had learned not to discuss classmates' birthday parties, sleepovers, or school activities that required fees or transportation that her mother couldn't provide. Miguel had stopped requesting toys, games, or special foods, developing an awareness of adult financial stress that showed in his conversations and his interactions with friends whose families weren't facing similar economic pressures. Both children had begun displaying behaviors that reflected their family's financial stress. Sophia had started hoarding small items like candy, school supplies, and toys, as if she was preparing for scarcity that might affect even basic necessities. Miguel had developed anxiety about being separated from his mother, worrying that their family might be split up if their financial situation continued to deteriorate. Rebecca's neighbors throughout Pembina County were facing similar struggles, creating a community-wide crisis that was dismantling the rural social structure that had supported local families for generations. The Anderson farm, 2 miles west, had been sold to a corporate agricultural operation in November. The Kowalski family, who had been Rebecca's closest neighbors for 15 years, were planning to sell their land to developers who wanted to build wind farms that would generate electricity for urban areas while eliminating agricultural production. The local grain elevator, which had been the economic and social center of the farming community for over 40 years, had reduced its operating hours due to decreased local grain production and was rumored to be planning closure before the end of the year. The farm supply store that had provided seeds, fertilizer, equipment parts, and agricultural expertise for 2 generations of local farmers was struggling to remain viable as farming families reduced their purchases and delayed payments for essential supplies. Even the social institutions that had held the rural community together were suffering from the economic pressures affecting local farming families. The Catholic Church, where the Torres family had been members for 3 generations, was struggling to maintain its programs and facilities as tithing and donations declined, along with agricultural income. The volunteer fire department was having difficulty purchasing equipment and maintaining vehicles as local tax revenues decreased and fundraising events became less successful due to the reduced discretionary income of community members. On this particular February morning, as Rebecca stood beside her failing farm equipment, watching the sunrise illuminate fields that lay dormant under 3 feet of snow, she was trying to calculate whether she had enough money in her checking account to purchase the heating oil. needed to keep her children warm for the remainder of the winter. The weather forecast called for another week of sub-zero temperatures, which meant that any hopes of reducing heating costs were about to be extinguished for at least another month. Rebecca had no idea that her life was about to change in ways that would transform not only her family's circumstances, but also contribute to American understanding of Cold War history and intelligence operations that had been hidden for over 60 years. She couldn't have foreseen that a simple act of kindness to a stranger would reveal that her grandmother's root cellar contained documents that would attract the attention of federal agencies and transform her from a struggling single mother into an important figure in American historical preservation. But first, a stranded motorist would need her help on the isolated county road that bordered her property. And Rebecca would need to make the choice between protecting her own limited time and resources or helping someone else who was facing their own moment of crisis and uncertainty. Rebecca Torres was about to discover that sometimes salvation comes disguised as another person's need, and that the most overlooked spaces can contain the most extraordinary secrets. The act of helping a stranger would unlock a mystery that had been waiting beneath her feet for decades, transforming her understanding of her family's property and her role in preserving American history. It was 3:45 in the afternoon on February 8th when Rebecca first noticed the sedan stopped awkwardly on County Road 7, its hazard lights blinking in the grey winter light as she drove home from her shift at Casey's General Store. The vehicle was positioned at an odd angle on the shoulder, clearly disabled rather than parked, with its driver's side door open and a figure standing beside it in what appeared to be business attire completely inappropriate for North Dakota winter conditions. Rebecca's first instinct was to keep driving. She was already running late to pick up Sophia and Miguel from their after-school program. Her ancient Honda Civic was low on gas that she could barely afford, and stopping to help strangers was a luxury that single mothers facing financial crisis couldn't realistically indulge. But as she got closer to the stranded vehicle, Rebecca could see that the person standing beside it was an elderly man, probably in his 70s, wearing only a light jacket and dress shoes that provided no protection against the 15-degree weather and wind chill that made the air feel dangerously cold. The humanitarian instincts that her grandmother Carmen had instilled in her during childhood overrode Rebecca's practical concerns about time and money. She pulled over behind the disabled sedan, grabbed the emergency blanket she kept in her back seat for winter travel, and approached the stranded motorist with the cautious helpfulness that rural people extend to others facing unexpected difficulties. "Sir, are you okay?" Rebecca called out as she walked toward the man, noting that he was shivering visibly and appeared to be having trouble with his cell phone. "It's way too cold to be standing out here without proper winter gear. Do you need help with your car or a ride to somewhere warm?" The elderly man looked up with relief that was immediately visible in his expression. He was well dressed in a way that suggested professional status or retirement comfort, wearing a wool overcoat that would have been appropriate for urban winter weather but was inadequate for rural North Dakota conditions. His hair was silver white, neatly styled, and his general appearance suggested someone who was accustomed to controlled environments rather than roadside emergencies in agricultural areas. "Thank you so much for stopping," the man said, his voice carrying a slight accent that Rebecca couldn't immediately identify. "My car started making terrible noises about 2 miles back, then just stopped completely." My cell phone isn't getting any signal out here, and I'm afraid I'm not dressed appropriately for walking any significant distance in this weather." Rebecca immediately wrapped the emergency blanket around the man's shoulders, noting that his hands were already showing signs of cold exposure, and his breathing was creating large clouds of vapor that indicated his body was working hard to maintain core temperature in the dangerous conditions. "Let's get you warmed up first, then we'll figure out what's wrong with your car," Rebecca said, guiding him toward her Honda. "I've got the heater running, and there's a mechanic in Cavalier who can probably help with whatever's wrong with your vehicle." As they walked toward her car, the elderly man extended a gloved hand in formal introduction. "I'm Dr. Heinrich Weber," he said. "I'm a retired professor from the University of Minnesota, and I was driving to Winnipeg to visit archives at the University of Manitoba for a research project I'm working on. I'm afraid my knowledge of automotive repair is virtually non-existent, and I clearly underestimated the challenges of winter driving in rural areas." Rebecca shook his hand and helped him into the passenger seat of her Honda, immediately turning up the heat and offering him coffee from her thermos. "I'm Rebecca Torres. This is my family's farm," she said, gesturing toward the snow-covered fields that stretched in all directions. "Let me take a look at your car and see if it's something simple, then we can figure out the best way to get you help." Dr. Weber gratefully accepted the coffee and settled into the warm car while Rebecca examined his sedan. The vehicle was a late-model Buick that appeared to be well-maintained, but when Rebecca looked under the hood, she could see immediately that the serpentine belt had snapped completely, leaving several essential systems inoperative. The repair would require a replacement belt and professional installation, neither of which were available on a rural county road in the middle of winter. Rebecca returned to her car with the assessment that Dr. Weber's vehicle would need to be towed to a repair shop, a process that would take several hours and cost several $100s. The elderly professor looked concerned when she explained the situation, mentioning that he was traveling on a limited budget for his research project and hadn't anticipated expensive automotive repairs during his trip. "Dr. Weber, I need to pick up my children from their after-school program, but after that, I'd be happy to give you a ride into Cavalier, where you can arrange for towing and repairs," Rebecca offered. "You're welcome to wait at my house where it's warm, and we can figure out the logistics from there." The professor's relief was immediately apparent. "That's incredibly kind of you, Ms. Torres. I don't want to impose on your family, but I would be very grateful for somewhere warm to wait while I make arrangements for my car." Rebecca collected Dr. Weber's luggage from his disabled vehicle, noting that he was traveling with several boxes of documents and research materials that seemed unusually extensive for a simple archival research trip. The professor explained that he was working on a book about German immigration to the upper Midwest during the post-World War II period, focusing on the experiences of refugees and displaced persons who had settled in rural communities throughout Minnesota, North Dakota, and Manitoba. "I'm particularly interested in the stories of families who established farms and small businesses in this region during the 1940s and 1950s, Dr. Weber explained as they drove toward Rebecca's farmhouse. "There's so much history that's been lost or forgotten, and I'm trying to document these experiences before the people who lived through them are no longer available to share their stories." Rebecca found herself interested in Dr. Weber's research, particularly since it related to the time period when her grandfather Miguel had established their family farm. My grandfather came to this area in 1952, she mentioned. He was Mexican, not German, but he was definitely part of that post-war wave of people who were looking for opportunities to build new lives in rural America. Dr. Weber's professional interest was immediately engaged. That's exactly the kind of story I'm hoping to document. The ethnic diversity of rural settlement during that period is often overlooked in historical accounts that focus primarily on European immigration patterns. When they arrived at the Torres farmhouse, Rebecca was suddenly self-conscious about the modest appearance of her home and the visible signs of financial stress that she normally tried to hide from outsiders. The peeling paint, the small pile of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter, and the sparse furnishings that reflected her family's reduced circumstances were embarrassing reminders of how far their situation had declined from the prosperous farm operation that Dr. Weber might have expected. But the elderly professor seemed genuinely interested in the farmhouse and its history, asking thoughtful questions about the construction, the layout, and the agricultural operations that had supported the Torres family over the decades. His academic perspective made him appreciate details that Rebecca had taken for granted, and his enthusiasm for rural history helped her see her family's property through the eyes of someone who understood its historical significance. This is a wonderful example of post-war agricultural architecture, Dr. Weber observed, as Rebecca showed him around the main floor of the house. The combination of practical farming functionality with family living space reflects the values and priorities of immigrant families who were building new lives in America. Rebecca prepared coffee and offered Dr. Weber some of the homemade cookies that Sophia had helped her bake over the weekend. Simple hospitality that felt natural despite their family's financial constraints. The professor seemed genuinely appreciative of the warmth and kindness, mentioning that academic research travel often involved impersonal hotels and restaurants rather than authentic family experiences like the one Rebecca was providing. When Sophia and Miguel arrived home from their after-school program, they were initially shy around the unexpected visitor. But Dr. Weber's genuine interest in their lives and their family's history quickly put them at ease. He asked thoughtful questions about their school experiences, their favorite subjects, and their understanding of their family's background, treating them with the respectful attention that adults rarely gave to children their age. Your great-grandfather must have been a very brave man to come to a new country and start a farm in a place where he didn't know anyone, Dr. Weber told Sophia and Miguel. The Torres family farm is part of an important chapter in American history, and you should be proud of what your family has built here. The children were fascinated by Dr. Weber's stories about historical research and his travels to archives and universities throughout the region. Miguel was particularly interested in the professor's descriptions of old documents and photographs that helped tell the stories of families from long ago, while Sophia was intrigued by his explanations of how historians piece together information from different sources to understand what life was like in previous decades. As the afternoon progressed into evening, Rebecca found herself reluctant to drive Dr. Weber into town for his car repairs. The elderly professor had brought an unexpected warmth and intellectual stimulation into their home, and his presence had created a temporary respite from the financial stress and isolation that had dominated their family's life for months. Dr. Weber seemed equally reluctant to leave. mentioning several times how much he was enjoying the opportunity to experience authentic rural family life and to learn about the Torres family's history directly from the people who had lived it. When Rebecca offered to let him stay for dinner, he accepted gratefully, insisting on contributing groceries from his travel supplies to help with the meal preparation. During dinner, Dr. Weber shared stories about his own family's immigration experience, describing how his grandparents had fled Germany during the 1930s and had struggled to establish new lives in Minnesota while dealing with anti-German sentiment and economic challenges that were remarkably similar to what many immigrant families had faced in rural America. Every family that came to this region during that era has stories of hardship and resilience, Dr. Weber explained. The difference between success and failure often came down to the kindness of neighbors who were willing to help strangers, just like you've helped me today. After dinner, as Rebecca was preparing to drive Dr. Weber into Cavalier for his car repairs, the professor made a request that would change everything about their relationship and about Rebecca's understanding of her family's property. "Ms. Torres, I don't want to impose further on your hospitality, but I noticed that your farmhouse appears to have a root cellar or basement storage area," Dr. Weber said carefully. "As part of my research, I'm particularly interested in the storage and preservation methods that immigrant families used during the 1940s and 1950s. Would it be possible for me to see your family's storage areas? These spaces often contain artifacts and documents that provide valuable insights into rural life during that historical period." Rebecca hesitated, suddenly aware that she hadn't been in her grandmother's root cellar for several years and wasn't sure what condition it might be in. The underground storage area had been built by her grandfather Miguel in the early 1950s for storing root vegetables, canned goods, and other food supplies that needed cool, dark preservation conditions. Her grandmother Carmen had continued using it throughout her lifetime. But since Carmen's death 3 years earlier, Rebecca had been too busy with immediate survival needs to maintain or organize the underground storage space. "It's probably pretty messy down there," Rebecca warned Dr. Weber. "My grandmother used it for food storage and probably kept a lot of old household items that I haven't had time to sort through. But if you're interested in seeing it for your research, I'd be happy to show you what's down there." Dr. Weber's enthusiasm for the opportunity was immediately apparent. "That would be wonderful." These kinds of family storage spaces are exactly where historians often find the most authentic artifacts and documents from earlier periods. Even household items and storage containers can provide valuable information about how families lived and what they considered important enough to preserve. Rebecca retrieved a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and led Dr. Weber through the farmhouse to the back door that provided access to the exterior entrance of the root cellar. The underground storage area was accessed through a wooden door set at an angle into a concrete foundation that had been built into the natural slope behind the farmhouse, a design that provided insulation and temperature control for food preservation. Rebecca opened the cellar door and shone her flashlight into the underground space. She realized that she was about to show Dr. Weber a part of her family's history that she herself had never fully explored or understood. The root cellar had always been her grandmother's domain, a mysterious underground world that had seemed almost magical to Rebecca as a child, but had become simply another part of the farm's infrastructure as she grew older. Neither Rebecca nor Dr. Weber could have anticipated that they were about to discover evidence of activities that would transform their understanding of rural North Dakota history and attract the attention of federal agencies that specialized in Cold War intelligence and national security investigations. The root cellar that Rebecca's grandfather had built in 1952 descended 8 feet underground through a series of wooden steps that creaked ominously under their weight. The air inside was cool and dry, carrying the musty scent of decades-old preservation activities mixed with something else that Rebecca couldn't immediately identify. A faint chemical odor that seemed out of place in what should have been a simple food storage area. Dr. Weber followed Rebecca down the narrow staircase, his academic excitement evident despite the cramped conditions and uncertain footing. The underground space was larger than Rebecca had remembered from her childhood visits, extending approximately 12 feet in each direction, with stone walls that her grandfather had constructed using local fieldstone and concrete mortar that had held up remarkably well over 7 decades. Rebecca's flashlight beam revealed shelves lined with dozens of glass canning jars, most still containing preserved vegetables and fruits that her grandmother had prepared years earlier, their contents now darkened and unrecognizable, but still sealed in testimony to Carmen's domestic skills and commitment to food security. Wooden crates and cardboard boxes were stacked along the walls, containing what appeared to be household items, seasonal decorations, and family memorabilia that Carmen had stored but never discarded. "This is remarkable," Dr. Weber said, examining the stone construction and ventilation system that kept the underground space dry and temperature-controlled. "Your grandfather was clearly a skilled builder. This kind of root cellar construction requires knowledge of drainage, insulation, and air circulation that many farmers of that era had to learn through trial and error." Rebecca began moving boxes and crates to give Dr. Weber better access to examine the cellar's construction features, but as she lifted a particularly heavy wooden crate from the floor near the back wall, she noticed something unusual about the stone pattern behind it. Several of the fieldstones appeared to be arranged differently from the rest of the wall, creating what looked like a deliberate pattern, or possibly even a concealed opening. "Dr. Weber, could you shine your light over here?" Rebecca asked, running her fingers along the stones that seemed out of place. "This section of the wall looks different from the rest. The stones don't quite match the pattern that my grandfather used everywhere else." Dr. Weber approached the back wall with the focused attention of someone who had spent decades examining historical artifacts and architectural details for clues about past activities. His flashlight beam revealed that approximately 6 stones in the lower portion of the wall were indeed different from the surrounding construction, both in their size and in the way they had been fitted into the overall structure. "These stones have definitely been removed and replaced at some point," Dr. Weber observed, his voice carrying the excitement of someone who sensed that they might be looking at something significant. "See how the mortar around these particular stones is a slightly different color and texture. This suggests that this section of the wall was modified after the original construction was completed." Rebecca examined the stones more carefully, discovering that they weren't actually mortared in place like the rest of the wall construction. Instead, they appeared to be fitted into position in a way that would allow them to be removed relatively easily, creating what was essentially a concealed access panel built into the cellar wall. "Should we try to remove them?" Rebecca asked, uncertain whether they should be disturbing what might be part of the cellar's original design, or possibly damaging something that her grandfather had built for purposes she didn't understand. Doctor. Rebecca nodded enthusiastically. If your grandfather built this as some kind of concealed storage area, it might contain exactly the kind of historical artifacts I'm hoping to document. Hidden storage spaces were common among immigrant families who had experienced political persecution or economic uncertainty in their countries of origin. Working together, Rebecca and Dr. Weber carefully removed the loose stones, revealing a cavity in the wall that extended back approximately 18 inches into what appeared to be a naturally occurring gap between the cellar's stone foundation and the earth behind it. Rebecca's flashlight beam illuminated the interior of the concealed space, revealing several wrapped bundles and what appeared to be a metal document box that had been carefully protected from moisture and temperature fluctuations. "My goodness," Dr. Weber whispered, his academic composure giving way to genuine amazement. "Your grandfather created a serious archival storage system. These items have been preserved under ideal conditions for decades." Rebecca reached into the concealed cavity and carefully removed the first bundle, which proved to be wrapped in multiple layers of oiled cloth and plastic sheeting that had protected its contents from any moisture or deterioration. The bundle was heavier than she had expected and felt like it contained papers or documents rather than household items or personal memorabilia. Dr. Weber helped her extract the metal document box, which was a sturdy, military-style container that appeared to be designed for protecting important papers under challenging conditions. The box was secured with a simple latch, but wasn't locked, suggesting that it had been placed in the concealed storage area by someone who expected it might need to be accessed by family members who wouldn't have keys or combinations. "Should we open these up here, or should we take them upstairs where we have better light and more space to examine them properly?" Rebecca asked, suddenly feeling uncertain about what they might be discovering and whether she should be investigating her grandfather's private storage without understanding his intentions. Dr. Weber's academic training immediately guided his response. "Let's take everything upstairs where we can examine it carefully and document what we find. If these items have historical significance, we want to handle them properly and make sure we understand their context before we make any decisions about what to do with them." They carefully carried the bundles and document box up from the root, the cellar, placing them on Rebecca's kitchen table under the bright overhead lighting that would allow them to examine the materials properly. Sophia and Miguel gathered around with curiosity, sensing that the adults had discovered something important and wanting to be part of whatever was happening. Rebecca unwrapped the first bundle with the careful attention that Dr. Weber's academic presence seemed to demand, revealing a collection of documents that were immediately puzzling and concerning. The papers appeared to be official government forms, but they were printed in multiple languages, including English, German, and what looked like Russian or possibly other Eastern European languages that Rebecca couldn't identify. Dr. Weber's expression changed dramatically as he examined the first few documents, his academic excitement giving way to something approaching alarm. "Ms. Torres, these appear to be intelligence documents from the Cold War period. I'm seeing references to surveillance activities, contact protocols, and what might be coded communication procedures." Rebecca felt a chill that had nothing to do with the February weather outside. What does that mean exactly? Why would my grandfather have intelligence documents hidden in our root cellar? Before Dr. Weber could respond, Rebecca opened the metal document box, revealing contents that made the situation far more serious and complicated. The box contained dozens of documents that were clearly official government materials, including what appeared to be surveillance photographs, maps marked with symbols and notations, and typewritten reports that referenced locations throughout North Dakota, Minnesota, and the Canadian border region. Dr. Weber, I don't understand what any of this means, Rebecca said, her voice reflecting growing anxiety about what they were discovering. My grandfather was just a farmer. He came here from Mexico to start a new life and grow crops. Why would he have all these government documents and photographs? Dr. Weber was examining the documents with the focused attention of someone who understood their potential significance much better than Rebecca did. His academic background had included courses in Cold War history and intelligence operations, and he was recognizing patterns and references that suggested these materials were far more serious than simple historical artifacts. Rebecca, I think we need to consider the possibility that your grandfather was involved in intelligence activities during the 1950s and 1960s, Dr. Weber said carefully. The border location of this farm, the concealed storage system, and the nature of these documents all suggest that this property might have been used as some kind of staging area or safe house for intelligence operations. Rebecca stared at the documents spread across her kitchen table, trying to process the idea that her beloved grandfather, the man who had taught her to plant corn and had built the farmhouse where she was raising her own children, might have been involved in spy activities or government operations that he had never mentioned to his family. But he was just a farmer, Rebecca repeated, her voice carrying the confusion of someone whose understanding of family history was being completely rewritten. He grew wheat and corn and raised cattle. He went to church every Sunday and helped his neighbors during harvest season. How could he have been involved in spy stuff without anyone in the family knowing about it? Dr. Weber continued examining the documents, occasionally making soft exclamations as he discovered items that appeared to be particularly significant. Intelligence operatives during the Cold War period often used legitimate occupations and rural locations as cover for their activities. A farm near the Canadian border would have been an ideal location for monitoring cross-border movement and coordinating with intelligence assets in both countries. The implications of Dr. Weber's assessment were beginning to sink in for Rebecca, creating a growing sense of unease about what they had discovered and what it might mean for her family's current situation. If her grandfather had been involved in intelligence activities, these documents might still be classified or sensitive in ways that could create legal problems for her family. Dr. Weber, should we be looking at these documents? Are we doing something illegal by examining materials that might belong to the government? Rebecca asked, suddenly worried that her act of kindness in helping a stranded motorist was leading to complications that could make her family's situation even worse than it already was. The professor paused in his examination of the documents, clearly grappling with the same concerns that Rebecca was expressing. These materials appear to have been in your family's possession for decades, so you certainly have the right to examine property that was stored on your land by your grandfather. But given the apparent nature of these documents, we should probably contact appropriate authorities to determine whether they have ongoing security or historical significance. Rebecca looked around her modest kitchen, trying to imagine federal agents and government officials invading the space where she prepared meals for Sophia and Miguel, where they did homework and shared family conversations. The idea of involving government authorities in her family's affairs felt frightening and potentially dangerous, especially given her current financial vulnerability and her status as a single mother who couldn't afford legal complications. "What kind of authorities are we talking about?" Rebecca asked. "Local police, FBI, some kind of intelligence agency? I don't want to get my family in trouble over something my grandfather did 70 years ago that we didn't even know about." Dr. Weber was clearly struggling with the same concerns, recognizing that his academic excitement about a potential historical discovery had to be balanced against the practical and legal implications for Rebecca and her children. The appropriate contact would probably be the FBI, since they handle matters involving historical intelligence materials and national security issues. But we should approach this carefully and make sure you have legal representation before you make any official reports. As they continued examining the documents, both Rebecca and Dr. Weber realized that they were looking at materials that appeared to document intelligence activities extending over several years and involving multiple individuals who had used the Torres farm as some kind of operational base. Maps showed surveillance positions along the Canadian border. Photographs depicted individuals and vehicles that had apparently been under observation, and typewritten reports referenced coded communications and coordination with unspecified government agencies. "Rebecca, I think we need to stop examining these materials until we can get proper guidance about how to handle them," Dr. Weber said, his academic excitement now completely overshadowed by concern about the legal and security implications of their discovery. "These documents appear to be far more significant than simple historical artifacts, and we could be creating problems for both of us if we continue investigating them without proper authorization." Rebecca began carefully rewrapping the documents, feeling overwhelmed by the realization that her simple act of helping a stranded motorist had led to the discovery of materials that could completely transform her understanding of her family's history and potentially create new complications for her already difficult circumstances. "Dr. Weber, what am I supposed to do with all this?" Rebecca asked, gesturing toward the bundles of documents that now seemed like dangerous secrets rather than interesting family history. "I can't afford lawyers or legal problems. I'm already facing foreclosure on the farm. And now I find out that my grandfather might have been a spy and left classified documents in our basement." The elderly professor looked at Rebecca with sympathy, clearly recognizing that his academic enthusiasm had led them into a situation that was far more complex and potentially problematic than either of them had anticipated when they had decided to explore the root cellar together. "Rebecca, I want you to know that I'll help you navigate this situation in whatever way I can," Dr. Weber said. "My academic background gives me some knowledge about how to approach government agencies, and I have colleagues who specialize in declassified documents and Cold War history who might be able to provide guidance about the best way to handle these materials." As Rebecca looked at her children, who were still gathering around the kitchen table with curiosity about the mysterious documents their mother and the visiting professor had discovered, she realized that her family's life was about to change in ways that she couldn't predict or control. The simple act of kindness that had motivated her to help Dr. Weber with his disabled car had revealed secrets that had been hidden beneath her feet for her entire life. Secrets that might provide answers to questions about her family's history, while also creating new uncertainties about their future. The next morning brought a phone call that would transform Rebecca's quiet concern into immediate crisis. Dr. Weber had spent the night at the local motel in Cavalier, but instead of arranging repairs for his vehicle as planned, he had contacted his academic colleagues at the University of Minnesota to seek guidance about the documents they had discovered. In Rebecca's root cellar, "Rebecca, I need to speak with you urgently," Dr. Weber said when she answered her phone at 7:30 a.m., his voice carrying a tension that immediately put her on alert. "I've spoken with Dr. Margaret Hoffman, who heads the Cold War Studies program at the university, and she believes the materials we found may be far more significant than either of us initially realized." Rebecca felt her stomach tighten as she prepared Sophia and Miguel for school, trying to maintain normal routines while processing the implications of Dr. Weber's call. "What do you mean by more significant? I thought we already established that these were probably intelligence documents from the 1950s. Dr. Weber's explanation would shatter Rebecca's remaining hopes that her family's discovery might be manageable through quiet academic channels. Dr. Hoffman has connections with federal archivists who specialize in declassified intelligence materials. When I described some of the document types and the border location of your farm, she immediately recognized patterns that suggest your grandfather's operation was part of something called the Prairie Network, a counterintelligence system that was established to monitor Soviet activities along the Canadian border during the height of the Cold War. Rebecca dropped the lunch she was packing for Miguel, her hands suddenly shaking as she realized that Dr. Weber was describing her grandfather's involvement in activities that were far more serious and potentially dangerous than simple historical artifacts. "Dr. Weber, what does that mean for my family? Are we in some kind of trouble because of what my grandfather did?" The professor's voice carried genuine concern for Rebecca's situation as he continued his explanation. The Prairie Network was classified at the highest levels of government security, and many of its operations remain classified even today. If your grandfather was indeed part of this network, the documents in your possession might contain information that is still considered sensitive by federal intelligence agencies. Rebecca sank into her kitchen chair, staring at the spot on the table where they had examined the mysterious documents the previous evening. The bundles were now stored in her bedroom closet, wrapped and hidden like dangerous secrets that she didn't know how to handle safely. "What am I supposed to do? I can't afford to get involved in government investigations or legal complications." Dr. Weber's response revealed the full scope of what Rebecca was facing. "Rebecca, I'm afraid the decision about government involvement may no longer be entirely yours to make. Dr. Hoffman has advised me that materials of this nature cannot be kept secret indefinitely, and that failing to report their discovery to appropriate authorities could create legal problems that would be much worse than cooperating with an official investigation." The academic's words hit Rebecca like a physical blow, confirming her worst fears about the consequences of their discovery. She was already facing foreclosure on her farm, struggling to support her children as a single mother, and working a minimum wage job that barely covered basic expenses. The last thing she could afford was federal investigations, legal fees, and government officials disrupting her family's precarious stability. How long do I have before we need to contact these authorities? Rebecca asked, hoping for time to prepare her children and her finances for whatever complications were about to descend on their lives. Dr. Weber's answer eliminated any possibility of delaying the inevitable. Dr. Hoffman strongly recommends that we contact the FBI field office in Fargo today. She believes that voluntary cooperation and immediate disclosure will result in much better treatment than waiting until federal agencies discover the materials through other channels. Rebecca spent the morning after dropping Sophia and Miguel at school researching FBI procedures and Cold War intelligence investigations, trying to understand what her family might be facing and how she could protect her children from the disruption that federal involvement would inevitably bring to their lives. The information she found online was both reassuring and terrifying, describing cases where property owners had cooperated with intelligence investigations and received recognition for their assistance, but also cases where families had faced years of legal complications and government oversight. At 2:30 p.m., Rebecca's phone rang with a call that would mark the end of her ability to handle the situation privately. The caller identified herself as Special Agent Sarah Mitchell from the FBI field office in Fargo, and her professional but urgent tone immediately conveyed that Rebecca's situation had moved beyond academic consultation into active federal investigation. Ms. Torres, I understand that you've recently discovered materials on your property that may be related to historical intelligence activities, Agent Mitchell said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who was accustomed to dealing with sensitive national security matters. I'd like to arrange a meeting with you as soon as possible to discuss these materials and determine the appropriate steps for handling them. Rebecca's mouth went dry as she realized that the federal government was already aware of their discovery and was taking it seriously enough to assign FBI agents to investigate. Agent Mitchell, I need you to understand that I'm a single mother with 2 young children, and I'm already facing financial difficulties. I didn't know anything about these documents until yesterday, and I don't want my family to get in trouble over something my grandfather did decades ago. Agent Mitchell's response was professional, but not particularly reassuring. Ms. Torres, I want to assure you that you and your family are not suspected of any wrongdoing. However, the materials you've discovered may have significant national security implications, and we need to examine them to determine their current classification status and historical importance. The FBI agent explained that the investigation would involve multiple federal agencies, including specialists from the National Security Agency who dealt with Cold War intelligence materials, historians from the National Archives who could provide context for the documents, and possibly representatives from Canadian intelligence services if the materials involved cross-border operations. What does that mean for my farm and my children? Rebecca asked, her voice reflecting the growing panic she felt about losing control of her family's circumstances. Are you going to take over my property? Will there be federal agents living here? How long will this investigation take? Agent Mitchell's explanation revealed the full scope of what Rebecca was facing. We'll need to establish a secure perimeter around your property while our teams examine the discovery site and conduct a thorough search for additional materials. The process typically takes several weeks, during which time access to your property will be restricted and monitored by federal security personnel. Rebecca felt her world collapsing as she realized that the FBI was describing a complete takeover of her farm, the only home her children had ever known, and the last remaining asset that connected her family to their agricultural heritage. Agent: Mitchell, I can't afford to be displaced from my home for several weeks. I have 2 children in school, a job that I can't miss, and financial obligations that require me to maintain normal routines. The agent's response demonstrated that federal priorities would take precedence over Rebecca's personal circumstances. We understand that this situation creates hardships for your family and will work with you to minimize the disruption to your daily routines. However, the security requirements for this type of investigation are non-negotiable, and we need your cooperation to ensure that the process proceeds smoothly. Agent Mitchell arranged to meet with Rebecca the following morning, explaining that she would be accompanied by a team of specialists who would conduct preliminary assessments of the documents and the discovery site. She also recommended that Rebecca contact an attorney who specialized in national security law, a suggestion that highlighted the serious legal implications of her family's situation. Rebecca spent the evening researching attorneys who handled federal investigations, quickly discovering that legal representation for national security matters cost hundreds of dollars per hour and required retainer fees that were far beyond her financial capacity. The irony of needing expensive legal help to deal with the consequences of helping a stranded motorist was not lost on her as she struggled to find affordable options for protecting her family's interests. Dr. Weber called that evening to provide an update on his communications with federal agencies and academic experts who were already expressing interest in Rebecca's discovery. Rebecca, I've been contacted by researchers from 3 different universities, 2 federal agencies, and what appears to be a documentary film company that specializes in Cold War history. Your grandfather's documents are generating significant attention in academic and intelligence circles. The professor's news added another layer of complexity to Rebecca's situation. Dr. Weber, I don't want researchers and film crews descending on my property. My children and I just want to live quietly and keep our farm. Can't we just turn these documents over to the government and have them leave us alone? Dr. Weber's response revealed that Rebecca's hopes for privacy and anonymity were unrealistic given the significance of their discovery. Rebecca, the materials we found appear to document intelligence activities that historians have been trying to understand for decades. Your farm may have been a crucial node in Cold War operations that affected national security policy and international relations. This discovery is going to attract attention, whether we want it to or not. The academic explained that several of the documents they had examined contained references to operations and individuals that had been mentioned in declassified intelligence reports, creating connections between Rebecca's grandfather's activities and major Cold War events that had shaped American foreign policy during the 1950s and 1960s. What you have to understand, Dr. Weber continued, is that your grandfather appears to have been involved in counterintelligence operations that helped prevent Soviet infiltration and sabotage activities along the northern border. The Prairie network that he was apparently part of may have been instrumental in protecting American interests during some of the most dangerous periods of the Cold War. Rebecca listened to Dr. Weber's explanation while watching Sophia and Miguel work on their homework at the kitchen table. Their innocent concentration on math problems and reading assignments contrasting sharply with the adult world of international espionage and federal investigations that was about to disrupt their peaceful family routines. Dr. Weber, I understand that this might be historically important, but I need you to understand that my primary concern is protecting my children and keeping our family together," Rebecca said. "If federal agents take over our farm and turn our lives upside down, how am I supposed to maintain the stability that Sophia and Miguel need?" The professor's response demonstrated his growing understanding of the personal costs that his academic excitement about historical discovery was creating. "For Rebecca's family, Rebecca, I want you to know that I feel responsible for the complications this has created for you and your children. When I asked to see your root cellar, I was thinking like a historian, not like someone who understood the potential consequences of discovering classified materials. Dr. Weber offered to help Rebecca navigate the federal investigation process, drawing on his academic connections and his understanding of government bureaucracy to ensure that her family's interests were represented and protected. He also promised to help her find legal representation that she could afford, either through university legal aid programs or through professional organizations that assisted families dealing with unexpected federal investigations. That night, Rebecca lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her bedroom, listening to the winter wind rattling the windows of the farmhouse where 3 generations of her family had built their lives and raised their children. In less than 24 hours, federal agents would arrive to transform her quiet rural property into what would essentially be a crime scene under federal investigation. The act of kindness that had motivated her to help Dr. Weber with his car trouble had revealed secrets that her grandfather had kept hidden for 70 years. Secrets that were about to expose her family to the attention of federal agencies, academic researchers, media organizations, and possibly foreign governments that had interests in Cold War intelligence materials. Rebecca realized that her grandfather, Miguel, the man she remembered as a gentle farmer who had taught her to plant seeds and tend livestock, had lived a double life that involved activities he had never shared with his family. The implications of his secret work were now going to affect his great-grandchildren, 2 innocent children who were about to learn that their family's history was far more complicated and dangerous than they had ever imagined. As Rebecca finally drifted off to sleep, she carried with her the knowledge that tomorrow would mark the end of her family's quiet anonymity and the beginning of their involvement in historical events that would extend far beyond their small farm in rural North Dakota. The convoy of black SUVs that arrived at Rebecca's farm at 6 a.m. on February 10th looked like something from a Hollywood thriller, their darkly tinted windows and government license plates creating an ominous presence against the snow-covered landscape of rural Pembina County. Rebecca had been awake since 4:30 a.m., preparing coffee and trying to explain to Sophia and Miguel why federal agents would be visiting their home without frightening them about circumstances that she herself didn't fully understand. Special Agent Sarah Mitchell emerged from the lead vehicle wearing a dark winter coat and professional demeanor that immediately established her authority over the situation. She was accompanied by a team of 8 specialists, including FBI evidence technicians, National Security Agency analysts, Department of Defense historians, and what appeared to be technical experts whose specific roles Rebecca couldn't immediately determine from their equipment and professional bearing. "Ms. Torres, thank you for your cooperation with this investigation," Agent Mitchell said as she approached Rebecca's front porch, her breath creating clouds of vapor in the -20-degree air. "I want to assure you that we'll work to minimize the disruption to your family's routines while we conduct our examination of the materials and the discovery site. Rebecca invited the federal team into her farmhouse, immediately feeling overwhelmed by the presence of so many official personnel. In the modest living space where she and her children conducted their quiet daily lives, the agents were professional and respectful, but their sophisticated equipment, official credentials, and serious expressions transformed Rebecca's home into what felt like a command center for a major federal operation. Agent Mitchell introduced the team members and explained their specific roles in the investigation. Dr. Patricia Hawkins from the National Archives was responsible for authenticating and cataloging historical documents. Special Agent Robert Chen from the FBI's Counterintelligence Division would assess the security implications of any classified materials. Dr. Michael Petrov from the Defense Intelligence Agency would analyze operational details and coordinate with relevant military archives. Ms. Torres, before we begin our examination of the materials you discovered, I need to ask you some questions about your family's history and your grandfather's activities during the 1950s and 1960s, Agent Mitchell said, opening a leather portfolio that contained official forms and legal documents. Anything you can tell us about his background, his associates, or any unusual activities on this property could be helpful to our investigation. Rebecca found herself struggling to provide information about her grandfather's life that would be useful to federal investigators. Miguel Torres had died when she was 16 years old, and their conversations had focused on farming techniques, family stories, and practical lessons about rural life, rather than details about his past activities or professional associations that might have intelligence significance. My grandfather came here from Mexico in 1952 and bought this farm with money he had saved from working various jobs throughout the Midwest, Rebecca explained. He was always focused on farming and building a better life for his family. I never heard him talk about government work or anything that sounded like spy activities. Dr. Hawkins asked detailed questions about Miguel's social connections, particularly whether he had maintained relationships with other immigrants or had participated in community organizations that might have served as cover for intelligence activities. Rebecca realized that many aspects of her grandfather's social life had seemed perfectly normal to a child, but might have different implications when viewed through the lens of Cold War counterintelligence operations. He did have friends who came to visit fairly regularly, especially during the 1950s and early 1960s, Rebecca remembered. Some of them spoke languages other than English or Spanish, and I remember thinking it was interesting that my grandfather could communicate with people from so many different backgrounds. But I always assumed these were just other immigrants who were trying to establish farms or businesses in the area. Agent Mitchell's follow-up questions revealed that the federal investigators already possessed significant background information about Miguel Torres and his activities during the Cold War period. Ms. Torres, our preliminary research indicates that your grandfather may have been recruited by U.S. intelligence services specifically because of his location near the Canadian border and his ability to blend into rural immigrant communities without attracting attention. The agent explained that the Prairie Network had relied on individuals who could maintain legitimate occupations while conducting surveillance and coordination activities that appeared to be normal social and business interactions. Farmers were particularly valuable because their properties provided cover for radio communications. Their travel patterns for agricultural purposes allowed them to conduct surveillance without suspicion, and their social connections with other rural families created networks that could be used for intelligence gathering and asset management. Your grandfather's farm was located at a strategic position for monitoring cross-border movement and coordinating with Canadian intelligence services, Agent Mitchell continued. The documents you discovered suggest that he may have been involved in tracking Soviet agents who were attempting to establish operations in rural areas throughout the northern border region. As the federal team began their examination of the documents that Rebecca and Dr. Weber had discovered, their professional excitement became increasingly apparent. Dr. Hawkins's preliminary assessment revealed that the materials included operational reports, surveillance photographs, communication protocols, and coordination schedules that documented intelligence activities extending over nearly 15 years. Ms. Torres, these documents appear to be extraordinarily well-preserved examples of field intelligence reports from one of the most sensitive counterintelligence operations of the Cold War period, Dr. Hawkins explained. Many similar materials were destroyed or lost over the decades, making your grandfather's archives potentially invaluable for understanding how rural intelligence networks functioned during this critical period in American history. The National Archives historian described specific documents that referenced major Cold War events, including the Hungarian Revolution of 1956, the Berlin Crisis of 1961, and the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. Miguel Torres's reports had apparently provided intelligence about Soviet attempts to establish communication networks and support systems along the Canadian border that could be activated during international crises. Your grandfather was not just a peripheral participant in these operations, Dr. Hawkins continued. He appears to have been a key coordinator for intelligence activities throughout this region, managing multiple assets and maintaining communications with both American and Canadian intelligence services. The implications of Dr. Hawkins's assessment were staggering for Rebecca, who was struggling to reconcile the image of her beloved grandfather as a gentle farmer with his apparent role as a sophisticated intelligence operative who had been involved in protecting national security during some of the most dangerous periods of the 20th century. Special Agent Jen's examination of the security aspects of the documents revealed even more concerning implications for Rebecca's current situation. Ms. Torres, some of these materials contain information that remains classified under current national security guidelines. Your grandfather appears to have retained copies of documents that should have been returned to government agencies when his operational activities concluded. The counterintelligence specialist explained that the continued existence of these classified materials created legal complications that would require extensive review by multiple federal agencies to determine appropriate handling procedures. The process would involve declassification specialists, security analysts, and possibly congressional oversight committees that monitored intelligence activities and historical disclosure policies. What does that mean for my family? Rebecca asked, her anxiety increasing as she realized that the federal investigation was revealing complications far beyond her ability to understand or manage. Are we going to be held responsible for my grandfather keeping documents that he wasn't supposed to have? Agent Mitchell's response was careful but not particularly reassuring. Ms. Torres, there's no indication that you or your family knew about these materials or were involved in any improper activities. However, the sensitivity of some of these documents means that we need to conduct a thorough security review to ensure that no classified information has been compromised and that all relevant materials are properly secured. The agent explained that the security review would require a comprehensive search of Rebecca's entire property, including the farmhouse, outbuildings, and any other locations where Miguel Torres might have concealed additional materials. The process would involve ground-penetrating radar, metal detectors, and possibly excavation of areas where buried documents or equipment might be located. "How long will this security review take?" Rebecca asked, dreading the answer, but needing to understand what she and her children would be facing in the coming weeks. Dr. Petrov, from the Defense Intelligence Agency, provided the timeline that confirmed Rebecca's worst fears about the disruption to her family's life. Based on the scope of materials we've already identified and the security requirements for this type of investigation, we estimate that the comprehensive review will require approximately 6 to 8 weeks. During this period, access to your property will be restricted, and all activities will need to be coordinated through our security protocols. The defense intelligence analyst explained that the investigation would involve establishing a secure perimeter around the farm, installing temporary facilities for the federal teams, and implementing communication security measures that would prevent unauthorized access to classified materials or investigative procedures. Ms. Torres, we understand that this creates significant hardships for your family, Dr. Petrov continued. We're prepared to provide temporary housing assistance and compensation for the disruption to your normal activities. We're also authorized to cover reasonable expenses related to childcare, transportation, and other necessities that result from the security requirements. Rebecca felt a mixture of relief and apprehension as she realized that the federal government was offering financial assistance that could address some of her immediate economic pressures while simultaneously taking control of her property and her family's circumstances in ways that she couldn't predict or influence. What about my children's school? What about my job at Casey's? How am I supposed to maintain normal routines when federal agents are treating our home like a crime scene? Rebecca asked, her voice reflecting the overwhelming nature of the changes that were being imposed on her life. Agent Mitchell's response demonstrated that the federal investigators had already developed comprehensive plans for managing the practical aspects of Rebecca's situation. We've coordinated with local school officials to ensure that Sophia and Miguel can continue their education without interruption. We can provide transportation to and from school, and we're prepared to arrange alternative accommodations if staying in your home becomes too disruptive. The FBI agent also explained that they had contacted Rebecca's employer at Casey's General Store to explain that she was cooperating with a federal investigation and would need flexible scheduling during the examination period. The federal government was prepared to provide income replacement if Rebecca needed to take extended time off from her retail job to participate in the investigation. Dr. Weber arrived at the farm during the afternoon, having spent the morning consulting with his academic colleagues about the historical significance of the discovery and the appropriate procedures for scholarly access to the materials. His presence provided some comfort for Rebecca, but it also highlighted how completely her quiet, rural life had been transformed by their chance encounter and subsequent discovery. Rebecca, I want you to know that the academic community is extremely excited about what you've found, Dr. Weber said, his enthusiasm tempered by obvious concern for the impact on her family. Several universities are already discussing research in projects and historical preservation initiatives that could provide significant resources for studying and publicizing your grandfather's contributions to Cold War intelligence operations. The professor explained that the discovery was being compared to major intelligence archive findings that had reshaped historical understanding of Cold War operations, espionage networks, and the role of rural communities in supporting national security activities during the most dangerous period of Soviet-American confrontation. Universities and research institutions are prepared to offer substantial funding for preserving these materials and conducting comprehensive studies of their historical significance, Dr. Weber continued. There's also interest from publishers, documentary filmmakers, and museums that want to tell the story of how ordinary Americans like your grandfather contributed to protecting national security during the Cold War. Rebecca listened to Dr. Weber's description of the academic and media attention that her family's discovery was generating, trying to process the idea that her grandfather's secret activities were about to become the subject of scholarly research, historical publications, and possibly major media productions that would bring international attention to her small North Dakota farm. As the first day of federal investigation concluded, Rebecca stood in her kitchen surrounded by evidence that her life had been permanently altered by the decision to help a stranded motorist. Federal agents were establishing temporary facilities on her property. Academic researchers were making plans to study her family's materials, and government officials were implementing security procedures that would govern her daily activities. For the foreseeable future, the simple act of kindness that had motivated her to assist Dr. Weber had revealed secrets that connected her family to some of the most significant events of the 20th century, secrets that were now attracting the attention of federal agencies, universities, and media organizations from around the world. Rebecca realized that her role was evolving from struggling single mother to reluctant guardian of historical materials that had national security implications and scholarly significance far beyond anything she could have imagined when she had first noticed. Dr. Weber's disabled car on the rural county road beside her failing farm, the establishment of what federal agents euphemistically called a secure research facility on Rebecca's farm transformed her 280-acre property into something resembling a military installation within 72 hours of the initial FBI arrival. Temporary buildings appeared overnight, housing sophisticated communication equipment, document analysis laboratories, and security command centers that coordinated activities with federal agencies in Washington, D.C., and intelligence services. In Canada, Rebecca watched from her kitchen window as teams of specialists conducted systematic searches of every structure on her property, using ground-penetrating radar to examine areas where her grandfather might have buried additional materials, metal detectors to locate hidden containers, and thermal imaging equipment to identify concealed spaces within the farmhouse, barn, and outbuildings that had sheltered 3 generations of Torres family life. The scope of the federal operation expanded dramatically when Agent Mitchell informed Rebecca that preliminary analysis of her grandfather's documents had revealed connections to intelligence networks operating throughout Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and the Canadian provinces of Manitoba and Ontario. Miguel Torres had apparently been a regional coordinator for activities that extended far beyond the immediate border area, managing assets and operations that spanned hundreds of miles of territory. Ms. Torres, your grandfather's operational records indicate that he was involved in coordinating counterintelligence activities for what we now understand was one of the most sophisticated rural surveillance networks ever established by American intelligence services, Agent Mitchell explained during their morning briefing on the third day of the investigation. The materials we've found suggest that the Prairie Network prevented numerous Soviet infiltration attempts and provided crucial intelligence during several major international crises. Dr. Hawkins from the National Archives had been working around the clock to catalog and analyze the documents, her excitement growing as she discovered materials that filled significant gaps in historical understanding of Cold War intelligence operations. The archivist had identified operational reports that documented previously unknown Soviet attempts to establish sleeper agents in rural American communities, communication intercepts that revealed coordination between Soviet intelligence services and domestic sympathizers, and surveillance records that tracked foreign nationals who had attempted to establish cover identities as immigrant farmers and small business owners. Rebecca, what we're finding here is rewriting our understanding of how extensively Soviet intelligence services attempted to penetrate rural American communities during the 1950s and 1960s, Dr. Hawkins explained. Your grandfather's reports document dozens of cases where Soviet agents tried to establish agricultural operations or small businesses as cover for intelligence gathering and sabotage activities. The historian described specific cases where Miguel Torres had identified and reported suspicious individuals who had purchased farms or established businesses near critical infrastructure, including military installations, communication facilities, and transportation networks that would have been valuable targets for Soviet intelligence operations. His reports had led to FBI investigations that uncovered several actual Soviet agents and prevented potential sabotage operations during periods of heightened international tension. Special Agent Chen's security analysis had revealed even more significant implications for national security and international intelligence cooperation. Ms. Torres, your grandfather appears to have been involved in joint operations with Canadian intelligence services that we're only now beginning to understand. Some of these activities involved tracking Soviet agents who were attempting to use Canada as a staging area for operations against targets in the United States. The counterintelligence specialist explained that the documents included correspondence with Canadian intelligence officials, coordination protocols for cross-border surveillance operations, and intelligence reports that had been shared between American and Canadian agencies to prevent Soviet exploitation of the relatively open border between the two countries. The level of cooperation documented in these materials suggests that your grandfather was trusted with some of the most sensitive intelligence sharing arrangements of the Cold War period, Agent Chen continued. His reports were being read by officials at the highest levels of both American and Canadian intelligence services. The international implications of the discovery had attracted attention from Canadian intelligence historians and government officials who were coordinating with the FBI investigation to understand how their own Cold War operations had functioned and what materials might need to be reviewed for continued security sensitivity. Dr. Michael Petrov from the Defense Intelligence Agency had been focusing on the military and strategic aspects of Miguel Torres's activities, identifying connections between his rural intelligence network and broader Department of Defense initiatives to protect American military installations and strategic assets from Soviet intelligence, gathering and potential sabotage operations. Your grandfather's network was providing security intelligence for military facilities throughout the Northern Plains region, Dr. Petrov explained to Rebecca. His reports helped protect Air Force bases, missile sites, and communication facilities that were crucial to American nuclear deterrence capabilities during the most dangerous period of the Cold War. The defense intelligence analyst described how Miguel Torres's surveillance activities had contributed to protecting strategic air command bases in North Dakota and Minnesota, early warning radar installations along the northern border, and communication networks that coordinated nuclear weapon systems and military command structures throughout the region. Rebecca found herself struggling to reconcile these descriptions of her grandfather's sophisticated intelligence activities with her memories of the gentle farmer who had taught her to identify different types of soil, predict weather patterns by observing cloud formations, and care for livestock with patience and compassion. The man she remembered had seemed focused entirely on agricultural success and family welfare, showing no signs of the stress, secrecy, or political awareness that she would have expected from someone involved in high-level intelligence operations. Dr. Petrov, how is it possible that my grandfather was involved in all these spy activities without anyone in the family knowing about it? Rebecca asked. He lived with us, ate meals with us, helped us with homework and school projects. How could he have been leading this double life without showing any signs of the pressure or the secrecy that must have been involved? The Defense Intelligence Specialist response provided insights into the psychological and operational training that had enabled Miguel Torres to maintain his cover identity for decades. Intelligence operatives during this period received extensive training in compartmentalization, the ability to separate their operational activities from their personal lives in ways that prevented emotional or behavioral spillover that might compromise their effectiveness or their family's safety. Dr. Petrov explained that rural intelligence assets were specifically selected for their ability to maintain normal community relationships and family interactions while conducting surveillance and coordination activities that required them to observe, report, and sometimes interact with potentially dangerous individuals without displaying any awareness of the true nature of their activities. Your grandfather was chosen for this work because he demonstrated the psychological stability and emotional control necessary to protect both his operational effectiveness and his family's security, Dr. Petrov continued. His success in maintaining his cover for so many years while raising a family and building a successful farming operation indicates that he was an exceptionally skilled intelligence professional. The federal investigation had also revealed the sophisticated communication systems that Miguel Torres had used to coordinate with his intelligence handlers and to receive operational instructions from federal agencies. Technical specialists had discovered concealed radio equipment in the farm's barn, hidden communication protocols buried in routine agricultural correspondence, and coded message systems that had allowed him to report surveillance observations and receive operational guidance without attracting attention from neighbors or family members. Ms. Torres, Your grandfather was using communication methods that were far more advanced than anything we previously understood about rural intelligence operations during this period," explained Dr. Sarah Kim, a technical specialist from the National Security Agency, who had been analyzing the communication equipment and procedures documented in Miguel's operational files. Dr. Kim described radio systems that had allowed Miguel Torres to communicate directly with intelligence facilities in Washington, D.C., and Ottawa, encrypted messaging protocols that had protected sensitive information from interception by Soviet intelligence services, and coordination systems that had enabled him to manage multiple intelligence assets throughout the region, without creating communication patterns that could be detected by hostile surveillance. The level of technical sophistication documented in these materials suggests that your grandfather received extensive training in communication security and electronic surveillance techniques. Dr. Kim continued, "He was essentially operating as a one-man intelligence station that coordinated activities for an entire region." The discovery of Miguel Torres's communication capabilities had attracted attention from current intelligence officials who were interested in understanding how 1950s and 1960s technology had been adapted for covert rural operations, and how those techniques might inform contemporary intelligence activities in remote areas where modern communication systems might be vulnerable to detection or interference. Rebecca's role in the federal investigation had evolved from passive observer to active participant, as agents realized that her knowledge of the farm's history, her grandfather's routine activities, and her family's social connections might provide crucial context for understanding the operational environment in which Miguel Torres had conducted his intelligence work. Agent Mitchell had arranged for Rebecca to be interviewed by intelligence historians, operational analysts, and security specialists who needed to understand how Miguel Torres had managed to maintain his cover identity while conducting sophisticated intelligence activities that required him to travel throughout the region, maintain contact with potentially dangerous individuals, and coordinate with federal agencies without arousing suspicion among his neighbors, family members, or local community leaders. Rebecca, your insights into your grandfather's daily routines, his social relationships, and his integration into the local farming community are helping us understand how rural intelligence networks functioned during this critical period. Agent Mitchell explained, "Your observations about his behavior, his visitors, and his activities are providing context that we can't get from the operational documents alone." The FBI agent described how Rebecca's childhood memories of her grandfather's visitors, his travel patterns, and his community involvement were helping analysts understand the social cover that had enabled Miguel Torres to conduct intelligence activities while maintaining his reputation as a successful farmer and respected community member. Your grandfather's success in maintaining his cover for so many years required him to genuinely excel at farming, to build authentic relationships with his neighbors, and to contribute to his community in ways that established his credibility and prevented anyone from questioning his activities or his loyalties. Agent Mitchell continued. The federal investigators had also discovered that Miguel Torres's intelligence activities had contributed to protecting not only national security interests but also the safety and prosperity of the rural communities where he had lived and worked. His surveillance and reporting had helped prevent Soviet agents from establishing operations that could have threatened local infrastructure, agricultural systems, and community institutions that supported the economic and social stability of farming families throughout the region. Dr. Hawkins had identified specific cases where Miguel Torres's intelligence reports had led to the discovery and disruption of Soviet plans to sabotage agricultural facilities, communication systems, and transportation networks that served rural communities. His work had helped protect the farming economy, rural infrastructure, and community institutions that had enabled families like the Torres family to build successful lives in agricultural areas that might otherwise have been vulnerable to foreign interference and sabotage. Rebecca, your grandfather wasn't just protecting abstract national security interests, Dr. Hawkins explained. He was protecting the communities and the way of life that enabled immigrant families to achieve the American dream through hard work, community participation, and agricultural success. As the federal investigation entered its second week, Rebecca began to understand that her grandfather's intelligence activities had been motivated not only by patriotic duty, but also by his commitment to protecting the rural communities and agricultural systems that had provided opportunities for immigrant families to establish successful lives in America. The scope of Miguel Torres's contributions to American security and rural community protection was creating interest among federal officials in recognizing his service and ensuring that his family received appropriate acknowledgement for the sacrifices and risks that had been involved in his intelligence work. Agent Mitchell had mentioned preliminary discussions about compensation for the Torres family's cooperation with the investigation, recognition for Miguel Torres's service to American intelligence operations, and possibly assistance with Rebecca's current financial difficulties as acknowledgement of her family's historical contributions to national security. The federal investigation was revealing that Rebecca's grandfather had been not just a farmer or even just an intelligence asset, but a community protector whose work had helped ensure the safety and prosperity of rural families throughout the region during one of the most dangerous periods in American history. The breakthrough that would transform Rebecca's understanding of her family's legacy came during the third week of the federal investigation, when ground-penetrating radar detected a second concealed chamber beneath the root cellar that her grandfather had built. The discovery of this deeper, more sophisticated hiding place revealed that Miguel Torres's intelligence activities had been far more extensive and strategically important than even the federal investigators had initially suspected. Special Agent Mitchell called Rebecca to witness the excavation of what appeared to be a professionally constructed underground facility that extended 12 feet below the original root cellar, accessed through a concealed entrance that had been hidden beneath what appeared to be a natural stone formation. The engineering required to create this hidden space without disturbing the upper cellar or attracting attention during construction demonstrated a level of planning and resource commitment that indicated significant federal government support for Miguel Torres's operations. Miss Torres, what we're finding here suggests that your farm wasn't just a surveillance post or safe house, Agent Mitchell explained as technicians carefully removed decades of accumulated soil and debris from the concealed entrance. This appears to have been a major operational center for intelligence activities throughout the entire northern border region. The excavation revealed a chamber that had been constructed with concrete walls, professional ventilation systems, and electrical infrastructure that had allowed it to function as a secure communication center and document storage facility. The space contained radio equipment that was far more sophisticated than anything the investigators had expected to find in a rural location, along with filing systems that appeared to hold thousands of additional documents related to intelligence. Operations spanning nearly 2 decades. Dr. Hawkins's preliminary examination of the newly discovered materials revealed operational records that documented Miguel Torres's coordination of intelligence networks extending from Montana to Michigan, involving hundreds of assets who had provided surveillance, communication, and logistical support for counterintelligence. Operations that had protected American interests during critical periods of the Cold War. Rebecca, your grandfather appears to have been the regional coordinator for what was essentially a civilian intelligence army that operated throughout the rural areas of the northern United States, Dr. Hawkins explained, her voice carrying amazement at the scope of what they were discovering. These documents show that he was managing operations that involved farmers, small business owners, truck drivers, and other ordinary citizens who were providing intelligence support for national security operations. The newly discovered documents included personnel files for intelligence assets throughout the region, operational plans for surveillance and counterintelligence activities that had been coordinated from Rebecca's farm, and communication records that showed regular contact with intelligence officials in Washington, D.C., Ottawa, and military installations throughout North America. Special Agent Chen's analysis of the security implications revealed that the materials contained information about intelligence operations that had protected crucial infrastructure, including nuclear weapons facilities, early warning radar systems, and communication networks that had been essential to American military capabilities during the most dangerous confrontations of the Cold War. Ms. Torres, your grandfather's operational records document his involvement in protecting American nuclear deterrence capabilities during the Berlin crisis, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and several other international confrontations that could have led to nuclear warfare, Agent Chen explained. The intelligence he provided helped ensure that Soviet agents couldn't sabotage or gather information about American military systems that were crucial to preventing nuclear conflict. The counterintelligence specialist described specific operations where Miguel Torres's network had identified and tracked Soviet agents who'd been attempting to gather intelligence about American missile sites, nuclear weapons storage facilities, and command centers that coordinated nuclear weapons systems. His reports had contributed to capturing several Soviet agents and preventing intelligence breaches that could have compromised American nuclear security during periods when the world had come close to nuclear warfare. Dr. Petrov from the Defense Intelligence Agency had been analyzing the military aspects of Miguel Torres's operations, discovering that his intelligence network had provided security for some of the most sensitive military facilities in the United States. The documents revealed that he had coordinated surveillance of potential threats to strategic air command bases, missile facilities, and communication systems that were essential to American nuclear deterrence capabilities. Your grandfather's network was providing intelligence that helped protect the military systems that prevented nuclear war during the most dangerous period in human history, Dr. Petrov told Rebecca. His work contributed directly to maintaining the balance of power that kept the Cold War from becoming a nuclear holocaust. The defense intelligence analyst explained that Miguel Torres's intelligence reports had been read by officials at the highest levels of American military command, including generals who were responsible for nuclear weapons systems and strategic planning that determined American responses to Soviet military activities and international provocations. The scope of Miguel Torres's intelligence activities had attracted attention from current intelligence officials who were interested in understanding how civilian intelligence networks had functioned during the Cold War and how those organizational models might inform contemporary intelligence operations in rural and remote areas where traditional intelligence gathering methods might be less effective. Rebecca found herself struggling to process the magnitude of what the federal investigators were revealing about her grandfather's role in protecting American national security during the most dangerous period of the 20th century. The man she remembered as a gentle farmer who had taught her to appreciate the beauty of rural life had apparently been responsible for coordinating intelligence operations that had helped prevent nuclear warfare and protect the freedom and security of millions of Americans. Agent Mitchell, I need to understand what this means for my family, Rebecca said, her voice reflecting the overwhelming nature of learning that her grandfather had been involved in activities that had helped prevent nuclear war. Why are you telling me all this? What am I supposed to do with this information? The FBI agent's response revealed that the federal government was considering recognizing Miguel Torres's service and providing compensation to his family for the risks and sacrifices that had been involved in his intelligence work. Ms. Torres, your grandfather's contributions to American national security were extraordinary, and there are discussions at the highest levels of government about appropriate recognition for his service and support for his family. Agent Mitchell explained that preliminary assessments indicated that Miguel Torres's intelligence activities had been so significant and successful that he deserved to be recognized as one of the most important civilian intelligence assets of the Cold War period. His network had prevented numerous Soviet intelligence operations, protected critical military facilities, and provided strategic intelligence that had helped American officials make decisions that had prevented international conflicts from escalating into nuclear warfare. The Department of Defense, the Central Intelligence Agency, and the National Security Council are all reviewing your grandfather's operational records to determine appropriate forms of recognition for his service, Agent Mitchell continued. There are also discussions about compensation for your family's cooperation with this investigation and acknowledgement of the financial sacrifices that intelligence work required. The federal investigators had discovered that Miguel Torres's intelligence activities had required significant personal financial investments in communication equipment, travel expenses, and operational security measures that had reduced his agricultural income and limited his family's financial resources. His commitment to intelligence work had prevented him from maximizing the economic potential of his farming operation, creating financial constraints that had affected his family's standard of living and long-term financial security. Dr. Weber had been following the investigation's developments and had contacted Rebecca to explain the academic and historical significance of what was being discovered about her grandfather's intelligence work. Universities throughout the United States and Canada were expressing interest in establishing research programs focused on the Prairie Network and rural intelligence operations, with Rebecca's farm potentially serving as a research center and historical site that would attract scholars and students from around the world. Rebecca, what we're learning about your grandfather's work is going to be studied in universities, written about in history books, and remembered as one of the most successful intelligence operations of the Cold War, Dr. Weber explained. Your family's farm could become a historical landmark that tells the story of how ordinary Americans contributed to protecting freedom and preventing nuclear war. The professor described preliminary discussions among academic institutions about establishing a research center focused on Cold War rural intelligence operations, with funding that could provide substantial income for Rebecca's family while preserving her grandfather's legacy and educating future generations about the sacrifices that civilian intelligence assets had made to protect American security. Universities are prepared to provide significant funding for preserving these materials, establishing research programs, and creating educational opportunities that would honor your grandfather's memory while providing financial security for your family. Dr. Weber continued, the academic interest in Miguel Torres's intelligence work had also attracted attention from publishers, documentary filmmakers, and museums that wanted to tell the story of rural intelligence operations and the ordinary Americans who had risked their lives to protect national security during the Cold War. Preliminary discussions indicated potential income sources that could transform Rebecca's financial circumstances while ensuring that her grandfather's contributions to American history were properly documented and remembered. Agent Mitchell had also informed Rebecca that the federal government was prepared to provide immediate financial assistance to address her current foreclosure crisis and financial difficulties. Ms. Torres, given your family's cooperation with this investigation and your grandfather's extraordinary service to American national security, we're authorized to provide emergency financial assistance that would address your immediate needs, while longer-term compensation arrangements are being developed. The FBI agent explained that federal agencies had discretionary funds available for supporting families who had cooperated with intelligence investigations, particularly in cases where the investigation had revealed historical service that deserved recognition and compensation. Rebecca's foreclosure crisis and financial difficulties could be addressed immediately through federal assistance programs that acknowledged her family's contributions to American security. What kind of financial assistance are we talking about? Rebecca asked, hardly daring to hope that the federal government might be able to solve the economic problems that had been threatening her family's survival for the past 3 years. Agent Mitchell's response exceeded Rebecca's most optimistic expectations. We're prepared to provide immediate assistance that would pay off your current mortgage obligations, establish financial reserves for your family's security, and provide ongoing compensation for your cooperation with our historical research and preservation efforts. The FBI agent explained that preliminary calculations indicated compensation amounts that would not only solve Rebecca's immediate financial crisis, but provide long-term financial security that would allow her to focus on raising her children and preserving her grandfather's legacy without worrying about basic economic survival. The Department of Defense has discretionary funds available for recognizing the service of intelligence assets and their families. Agent Mitchell continued, based on your grandfather's contributions to national security, we estimate that appropriate compensation would be in the range of several $1 million, distributed over time to provide ongoing financial security for your family. Rebecca felt the world shifting around her as she realized that the federal investigation of her grandfather's intelligence activities was revealing not only his extraordinary contributions to American history, but also solutions to the financial problems that had been threatening to destroy her family's connection to their agricultural heritage and rural community. The simple act of kindness that had motivated her to help. Dr. Weber, with his car trouble, had revealed secrets that were transforming her understanding of her family's history, while also providing opportunities for financial security and historical recognition that would honor her grandfather's memory and ensure her children's future prosperity. As the federal investigation continued to reveal the extraordinary scope of Miguel Torres's intelligence activities, Rebecca began to understand that her role was evolving from struggling single mother to guardian of one of the most significant intelligence legacies of the Cold War period, with responsibilities and opportunities that would shape her family's future for generations to come. 3 years after federal agents had first cordoned off her farm, Rebecca Torres stood before a packed auditorium at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., addressing an audience of intelligence historians, government officials, and Cold War researchers who had gathered to commemorate the opening of the Miguel Torres Cold War Intelligence Archive. The woman who had once counted quarters to buy groceries for her children was now recognized as one of the foremost authorities on rural intelligence operations and the guardian of materials that had fundamentally changed historical understanding of civilian contributions to American national security. The transformation had been as dramatic as it was unexpected. The federal government's compensation for Miguel Torres's intelligence service had totaled $4.7 million, distributed through a combination of immediate assistance that had saved the farm from foreclosure and ongoing payments that acknowledged the historical significance of his contributions to Cold War intelligence operations. Rebecca's financial crisis had been replaced by security that allowed her to focus on preserving her grandfather's legacy while providing opportunities for Sofia and Miguel that she had never imagined possible. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rebecca began her keynote address, "3 years ago, I was a struggling single mother facing foreclosure on a farm that had been in my family for 3 generations. Today, I stand before you as proof that ordinary acts of kindness can reveal extraordinary hidden histories, and that the most important stories are often buried beneath the surface of our everyday lives." The audience included Dr. Weber, now a distinguished visiting scholar at the Smithsonian, whose chance encounter with Rebecca had launched an investigation that had identified over 300 previously unknown intelligence assets throughout the rural northern border region. His academic research had evolved into a comprehensive documentation project that was rewriting historical understanding of how civilian networks had protected American security during the most dangerous period of the Cold War. The professor's original research into German immigration had expanded into groundbreaking studies of multi-ethnic intelligence networks that had operated throughout rural America. His publications on the Prairie Network had become required reading in universities worldwide, establishing him as the leading expert on civilian intelligence operations during the Cold War era. The broken-down car that had stranded him on County Road 7 had led to discoveries that had transformed his academic career from regional immigration studies to international intelligence history. Special Agent Mitchell had been promoted to assistant director of the FBI's Historical Intelligence Division, a new department created specifically to handle the ongoing discovery and declassification of Cold War materials that were being found in rural communities throughout the United States. Her work with Rebecca's case had established protocols for handling similar discoveries and supporting families whose relatives had contributed to historical intelligence operations. The agent's innovative approach to historical intelligence investigations had become the standard for federal agencies dealing with Cold War legacy materials. Her team had developed procedures that balanced national security requirements with family privacy rights, ensuring that historical discoveries could be properly studied and preserved without disrupting the lives of descendants who had been unaware of their relatives' intelligence activities. The Torres farm had been designated as a National Historic Landmark, with the underground facilities that Miguel Torres had constructed now serving as a museum and research center that attracted visitors from around the world. The site generated substantial tourism income for Pembina County, while providing educational opportunities that helped visitors understand how rural communities had contributed to American national security during the Cold War. The museum complex included the original farmhouse, the preserved root cellar where the documents had been discovered, and the sophisticated underground communication center that Miguel Torres had operated for nearly 2 decades. Interactive exhibits allowed visitors to experience recreated intelligence operations, understand the technology that had been used for covert communications, and learn about the ordinary Americans who had risked their lives to protect national security during the most dangerous period of the 20th century. Sofia Torres, now 11 years old, had become fascinated by her great-grandfather's intelligence work and was already talking about pursuing careers in international relations or intelligence analysis. She had written award-winning school projects about Cold War history and had been featured in documentary films about civilian intelligence operations that had introduced her family's story to audiences throughout North America. The young girl's intelligence and articulate presentations about her family's history had impressed educators and researchers who predicted that she would follow in her great-grandfather's footsteps of public service, though hopefully through academic or diplomatic channels rather than covert intelligence operations. Sofia had become an advocate for preserving rural history and educating young people about the contributions that ordinary families had made to protecting American freedom. Miguel Torres Jr., 8 years old, had developed interests in engineering and technology inspired by the sophisticated communication systems that his great-grandfather had used for intelligence coordination. He spent hours at the farm's museum exhibits, asking detailed questions about radio equipment and encryption techniques that impressed visiting researchers and intelligence historians. The boy's technical curiosity and mechanical aptitude suggested that he might pursue careers in engineering or technology that would honor his great-grandfather's innovative use of communication systems for intelligence operations. His teachers had noted his exceptional abilities in mathematics and science, subjects that had been essential to Miguel Torres's success in operating complex communication equipment and coordinating intelligence networks throughout the region. The Miguel Torres Foundation, established with a portion of the family's compensation, had provided assistance to 12 other rural families whose properties had been investigated for potential intelligence connections. The Foundation's work had helped identify and preserve historical materials while supporting families through the complex process of federal investigation and historical recognition. Rebecca's foundation had become a model for supporting families who discovered historical intelligence materials on their properties. The organization provided legal assistance, financial support during federal investigations, and educational resources that helped families understand the historical significance of their discoveries while protecting their rights and interests throughout the complex process of declassification and historical preservation. Dr. Hawkins from the National Archives had used materials from Rebecca's discovery to establish the Rural Intelligence Studies Program, an interdisciplinary research initiative that was documenting civilian contributions to Cold War intelligence operations throughout rural America. Her work had identified similar intelligence networks in farming communities across multiple states, revealing the extent to which ordinary Americans had contributed to protecting national security. The historian's research had revolutionized understanding of Cold War intelligence operations, demonstrating that rural civilian networks had been far more extensive and sophisticated than previously recognized. Her publications had documented over 1,200 civilian intelligence assets who had operated throughout rural America, providing security for military installations, monitoring foreign agents, and coordinating with federal agencies to protect American interests during critical international confrontations. The international implications of Miguel Torres's intelligence work had led to collaborative research projects with Canadian intelligence. Historians and government officials who were using the discovered materials to understand their own Cold War operations and the extent of cross-border intelligence cooperation during the 1950s and 1960s. Joint American-Canadian research initiatives had revealed that cross-border intelligence cooperation had been far more extensive than either government had previously acknowledged, involving thousands of civilian assets who had monitored the world's longest undefended border to prevent Soviet infiltration and sabotage operations. The discoveries had led to improved contemporary intelligence cooperation and enhanced security measures that protected both countries from modern threats. Rebecca's story had attracted attention from publishers, filmmakers, and media organizations that wanted to document how ordinary families had contributed to protecting American freedom during the Cold War. A major motion picture based on her family's experience was in development, with proceeds designated for historical preservation and rural community development programs. The film project, starring award-winning actors and directed by a renowned filmmaker known for historical dramas, was expected to bring Rebecca's story to international audiences while generating funding for rural historical preservation initiatives throughout North America. Educational versions of the film would be distributed to schools and universities to teach students about civilian contributions to Cold War intelligence operations. Publishing companies had commissioned Rebecca to write her memoir, sharing the personal story of discovering her grandfather's intelligence legacy and the transformation of her family's circumstances from near poverty to financial security and historical recognition. The book would provide insights into the emotional and practical challenges of learning that a beloved family member had lived a double life protecting national security. The lesson I want to share with you today, Rebecca continued her Smithsonian address, is that the most valuable discoveries often come from the simplest acts of human kindness. When I stopped to help Dr. Weber with his broken-down car, I had no idea that this act of compassion would reveal secrets that had been hidden beneath my feet for 70 years. Rebecca's presentation included photographs and documents that illustrated her grandfather's intelligence work, showing how ordinary farming activities had provided cover for sophisticated intelligence operations that had protected American military installations and civilian communities from foreign threats. The audience was particularly fascinated by communication equipment that had been disguised as agricultural machinery and coded messages that had been hidden in routine farm correspondence. The audience responded with sustained applause as Rebecca concluded her remarks by emphasizing the importance of preserving rural history and supporting communities that had made sacrifices to protect American security. Her transformation from struggling farmer to historical preservationist had demonstrated that individual discoveries could create opportunities for education, research, and community development that extended far beyond personal financial benefit. As Rebecca returned to her farm that evening, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with her decision to help a stranger in need. The root cellar where she and Dr. Weber had first discovered her grandfather's secrets was now a carefully preserved historical site that attracted researchers and visitors from around the world, while the farmhouse where she had once worried about foreclosure notices was now the comfortable home of a family that had achieved financial security while preserving an important piece of American history. The children who had once worn thrift store clothing and packed generic lunch items were now thriving students whose educational opportunities had been transformed by their family's unexpected discovery and the recognition of their great-grandfather's contributions to American national security. Sophia was already being recruited by prestigious universities that wanted to support her interests in international relations, while Miguel was receiving encouragement from engineering programs that recognized his technical aptitude and family heritage. Rebecca Torres had learned that sometimes the most worthless-looking circumstances contain the seeds of the most valuable transformations, and that the most important discoveries are made not by people seeking treasure, but by people seeking to help others who need assistance and kindness. Her story proved that hidden treasures exist all around us, waiting for the right combination of human compassion, intellectual curiosity, and willingness to explore the unknown spaces that might contain secrets from the past that can transform our understanding of history and our possibilities for the future. The drought of financial desperation that had once threatened to destroy everything the Torres family had built had instead revealed foundations for everything they were meant to become. Not just successful individuals, but guardians of American history, protectors of rural heritage, and proof that ordinary people can make extraordinary contributions when they choose courage over comfort and service to others over service to themselves. What hidden stories might be waiting in your family's history? What secrets could be concealed in the places you pass by every day without a second thought? Rebecca's incredible journey reminds us that life-changing discoveries often begin with simple acts of kindness, and that the most valuable treasures are those we share with others who need our help and support. Speaking of incredible discoveries, you won't believe tomorrow's story about a school maintenance worker who found something in a century-old basement that rewrote everything we thought we knew about the founding of America. The artifacts he discovered were so significant that the Smithsonian shut down an entire wing to study them. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on, because this story will absolutely blow your mind. If Rebecca's transformation from struggling single mother to guardian of Cold War secrets inspired you, hit that like button and let me know in the comments what part of her story amazed you most. And don't forget to subscribe, because stories like these prove that extraordinary adventures are hidden everywhere, waiting for the right moment and the right person to bring them into the light, where they can change lives and rewrite history.